Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at one of the interviews to come out of Gamescom. I've been back and forth about whether to make videos on some of the interviews because a lot of it's been, I don't know if I would call it fluff, but there haven't been any meaty details. You know, there was one comment from Yoshi-P and one about like them being able to turn on cross data center travel whenever they want and it just being up to the player base, which is kind of in line with what they've already been saying for a while. They have their own reservations, but they said if people ask for it. But we have been asking for it. It still hasn't happened. The OCE thing is the closest we've realistically come. So I should say cross-region data center travel more specifically. There was also some lore tidbits about some speculation about some of the later things that happened as well in the story. I'm not going to bring up too much in the specifics, but there haven't been like game details. Like we're really waiting for live letters for the development roadmap, which honestly, I'm shocked we haven't heard a timeline for. But this interview has some of those details, and one bit in particular that, yes, means we have to dredge up an old topic, or at least it feels old at this point, of how easy the raid tier is. But it's some insight into that. So I have my own thoughts on it, but we'll go through the entire interview as a whole. Now, the first bit here, of course, asks about, you know, we're now expecting a news story that spans several expansions. Is it already foreseeable how many expansions will deal with the news story? And this is kind of a regurgitation. Yoshi-P, of course, has been asked this before, like, how are they going to do a new story? Is it going to be one that lasts 10 years? Is it going to be one that lasts however long? And he goes back and talks about, like, oh, by the way, this is a Crystal Universe. It's a German site, so this is actually Google translated. So excuse me if it's a little bit messed up. I'll include a link in the description. So for example, they mentioned way back when that they hadn't even really decided that they were going to be doing this whole like Heidelin Zodiac story wrap up until getting into 5.0. So that's kind of the same thing that's done here. There were always different routes in my head as to how that story could develop. We arrived at a certain goal was usually more of an improvisation than a fixed plan. With regards to the new story, which starts with a new key item, players who have already completed the story of Dawn Trail so far will already have some idea or guess where our journey takes us. Yeah, I have my ideas. I think I know how 7.3 is going to go approximately, and I think that we are going to have a general like expansion true end story in 7.3. And I think that's been reflected in some other interviews as well. But how long the new story will last or how many expansions it will span, I can't say for myself. Our biggest priority right now is to move the story forward with upcoming patches. We want to bring the element of surprise and excitement to the players as we shape the story and slowly but surely see a path to where the journey will take us. We attach great importance to the feedback and we'll use this to create a story everyone will enjoy. Yeah, they've said that they kind of don't know ever completely for certain what they're going to do. They take how things are received and determine if they want to keep going down those roads. So we don't really, they don't really know exactly where it's going. They don't have a 10-year plan for the story. So you'll just have to wait and see. Speaking of the future of 14, we defeated two strong antagonists in the Asians and Xenos who took a lot from us. Will there be similarly iconic enemies again in the new story? Of course, but it takes time to develop them. Although the Asians have already existed, they didn't make an appearance until the end of 2.0. The same was true at the end of 3.0 when the focus was on the war between humans and dragons. The Xenos appeared in 4.0. In view of this development, we'll try to create such connections in the future. Yeah, it's just kind of a general PR answer. Won't be the case that in the next expansion, an antagonist suddenly appears who says, I'm the strongest, and then becomes the enemy. Why not? You don't want another Xenos situation here? Missed the drastic strokes of fate that past expansions had in store for us, especially in the deaths of Hoshfont and Papalimo in Heavensward. Come to mind spontaneously. Will we see a scion from the current group pass away? Something they can't talk about yet. I don't know how you would have expected an answer. Yeah, no, we're going to kill one right now. Let's be honest. I don't think they are going to kill any of the main scions at any point soon, but he does go into a little bit more detail about how they frame character death in the game. I can't say that the possibility no longer exists, but if you say you missed the blows of fate, I can tell you that even we, the development team, had to cry while planning the death of Hoshfont. And when it happened in game and players were able to experience it, there was a big outcry in the community and even players who stopped playing because of it. I'm not going to lie. If you stop playing because a fictional character dies in something, I literally have no empathy or sympathy for you. Like, bruh, do you just not want stories to exist? Like, do you just don't want it? Just remove the factor altogether. So if possible, we want to do away with the element of the death of a beloved character just to bring more drama to the expansion in an easy way. Okay, I get that he's saying, don't just kill characters for the sake of killing characters. I agree with that. You don't want to Game of Thrones this shit, but I don't know. It just makes it sound like that's the only way they view it. And it's like he says here, of course, the character's fate can lead to death, and we won't avoid it by hook or by crook, but players can rest assured this is not a decision just to build drama. I mean, it has to be kind of at some point. Like, yeah, you can do it without making it just to do that. I don't know. It's just kind of a weird answer. I think I remember somewhere else in another interview recently, they very specifically said that they don't like to cheapen deaths. And I laughed because of Endwalker, where you go through kind of an emotional twist and like you kind of already know that it's not a permanent thing, but like I laughed at the statement. That's it, you know. But yeah, I've been saying they gotta have some deaths of like closer characters again at some point, because they've teased certain things about some characters. Y'shtola comes to mind in particular, that their candle should essentially be burning out. And that plot point has just been lost entirely. It's just been kind of tucked away into the back end because Y'shtola is as popular as she is. So they won't do it unless they have to. But I do think they need to experiment with moving stories in directions that lead to fates like that without necessarily building the drama around it. Anyway, will projection palettes, that's glamour prisms, eventually work outside of quiet areas, for example, in dungeons or in the outskirts? They've answered this a ton of times before. It's all data related. They're concerned about the data load that it creates, if it'll be deleted, duplicated, or changes happen without warning. They're concerned with that, and there's more data that actually travels in combat zones because combat data is prevalent there, so they just don't want to do it. They said they're working on it, and they can technically do it. They've been thinking about it, but while they have ideas, I don't know how much of a priority it really is. It might take a little longer before this is possible. Yeah, I don't know. This isn't something I expect anytime soon. I agree it's something they should probably work on as like a B tier thing, but I don't know. They've been pretty adamant about this point for so long that even when they say they're closer, or they could, it's like the cross-region data center travel. They've been saying for a while now, oh yeah, we could do it if the people want it, really want it. And it hasn't happened yet. Kind of. It has now with OCE, but still. In Dawn Trail, you meet many new NPCs during the Rite of Succession, while we get more background information on these in the game. Many of the characters we met in 7.0 and with whom we have connections are still provided with background information. From 7.3 at the latest, until the end of the story, meaning end of the game, we will learn more about the lives of our allies. This is such a general statement. Yeah, we'll learn until the game ends. We'll be learning about characters. But this is interesting. From patch 7.3 at the latest. So again, people have been wondering if Dawn Trail has a definitive endpoint in the 0.3 patch, like everything other than A Realm Reborn and Endwalker had. That statement kind of tells you that we're moving towards a finale point for Dawn Trail. And again, if you've paid close attention in 7.0 itself, you can probably formulate some pretty good theories about that. I have a few of my own, but that's not what this video is about. This is a hairstyle related question. Same deal. Will there be hairstyles for all races at all points? For example, Viera cannot wear the cloud hairstyle. That was a mistake. So I can already see Yoshida related the question very much to the Viera and Hrothgar races, as the example is about Viera. I have made this mistake before. While as an interviewer, it's usually great to give an example. I've noticed when I interview Yoshi-P, I have to be very careful about the example that I use, because I have had the same thing where like I present an example and Yoshi-P focuses only on the example and how that specific example needs to be communicated back to me, and instead doesn't talk about the actual question, which is how many hairstyles that certain races can wear. So it's not that we don't want that, but at the moment it's not possible for us. The unique elements on Viera and Hrothgar's heads force us to adjust the display of headgear and create custom hairstyles for these races. We're still getting a lot of feedback. Players want more options. Therefore, we have and will continue to work that these races can represent more equipment and hairstyles. Yeah, that's a pretty normal answer as soon as you bring up like a specific example of something to Yoshi-P. This is a question we all have. Capcom recently announced a sequel to Monster Hunter World. Are there any plans for a new crossover event with Monster Hunter? I would be happy to hunt a Morbol in Monster Hunter Wilds or a Legiana in 14, for example. Of course, our teams are in very good contact due to already existing crossover, and both sides are very happy with the result. I'm very good friends with the creator of Monster Hunter, Kanake Fujioka, and the director of Monster Hunter Wilds, Yuya Tokura. And I don't want to disturb... Shut up. I actually think I'm supposed to take that call, but I'll leave a voicemail because I think I know who it is. and I don't want to disturb them in their final work on Monster Hunter Wilds because they, like me, are very passionate in their works. But when we have reached a certain point in development and are having talks, there is a possibility we will have another crossover. Funny that this question comes today. Just last night, I drank together with Fujioka-san and Tokura-san. We all know what happens when Yoshi-P drinks with other directors and producers. Last time he was drinking with Sakaguchi, he was like, hey, you want us to take care of Fantasian and get it released on multi-platform and taken off of the Apple jail? And he's like, yes. Anytime Yoshi-P is drinking with another dev, you're like, business is happening. Something they don't want us to know about is happening. I feel pretty confident we will see a return of the Monster Hunter collaboration. And by return, I mean a sequel to it. The Monster Hunter collaboration, for those who don't know, is permanent content in 14. And the Behemoth, of course, in World is one that has caused many a grief. People like it. Some people hate it because it's a very technical fight, but still. I feel pretty confident that we'll have a Monster Hunter Wilds collaboration, but not until like at least 6 months after Wilds is out or something like that. Like way, I'm talking about like December of like 2025 timing at the very earliest. And as for what would cross over, people always ask that. This person lists, of course, the Morbol and Legiana, but Yoshi-P himself has requested Diablos from Monster Hunter to 14 and Nidhogg from 14 to Monster Hunter. I think for Wilds, Nidhogg's not a great choice. I think I'd like to see something else. Like a Morbol is a pretty interesting one. I think that actually makes sense for Wilds a little bit more. Maybe it's a little too desert-y, but I don't know that we've seen all the maps and like we don't know that there's some more lush greenery that you could like throw a Morbol into. So I think that's honestly, specifically for Wilds, a Morbol is actually kind of a better option as a whole. But I feel like we're almost certainly going to have it. Then we have the okay, so this is actually the question that made me even do this video in the first place. The Arcadian Light Heavyweight is the first part of Dawn Trail's new raid series. In previous presentations, they said the new end content would be more based on the difficulty level of Heavensward and Stormblood. What? They never said that. Heavensward. They should never say that. No one ever said that. That Heavens, no. Listen, there's one tier in Heavensward you can use as an example, and that is Creator. You do not use the other ones as templates for the difficulty. Don't do that. Just don't do it. All right. Now more players than ever have completed the new raid in week 1, and difficulty level seems to have dropped further. Is that just because the beginning of the raid series, or did they expect less from players? So people have speculated that the job changes had something to do with this. And Yoshi-P, I'll say, only kind of confirms that job changes in 7.05 were part of the factor. But I'll dive into a little bit more about that as someone who has hands-on experience with it a little bit. So if you look at the difficulty of the fights, there are two variables. On one hand, there are the mechanics the players have to play and stay alive. And on the other hand, there's DPS, which is based on the individual attack values of the classes. If we look at the first part, the mechanics, I think this time we had some unique attack patterns that were not too easy to master. But since it was the first raid tier, we didn't want to make it too hard. It should be accessible and manageable for as many players as possible so that they have the motivation to want to play for future raid tiers. Makes sense. That's what Asphodelos did. People got through Asphodelos and they were like, oh, wow, that was pretty challenging. I can't wait for DSR. Static crumbles in Nidstinian phase. I'm very worried about groups that week 1 or even week 2 this expansion and are like, yeah, I can't wait for Eden Ultimate. I'm frightened. I'm fruited for those groups. Now let's look at the second variable, the DPS. When developing the raid, we took the attack stats of the classes with 7.0 in their balance as a pattern for incoming damage. With the release of 7.0, however, it was noticeable that the DPS of the new job, Pictomancer, obviously with the Google Translate, Pictomont, clearly stands out from the other classes. We could have nerfed the Pictomancer before the raid, but since a lot of people love playing it, we decided to match the DPS of the other classes to that of Pictomancer. So with 7.05, we raised the attack stats of the other classes. At the same time, however, we also released the Savage Raid with the required DPS calculations based on the 7.0 balance. Since all the classes did more damage, the raid naturally became easier. Unfortunately, aligning the DPS of the classes took so much time, we were no longer able to make adjustments to the raid. We didn't want to rush the increase of stats required to complete the raid, as it could have happened that the raid would not have been manageable. That's why we decided to leave it that way and accept that even if 2-3 players die in mechanics, the raid can still be completed if everyone does their best. Of course, this results in people saying that the raid is too easy. I'll finish reading it, but I've got a lot to say about this. To sum it up, we didn't intentionally make the raid so easy. We didn't think player skill was too poor. We wanted job adjustments to be received positively and not slow down the fun of players with nerfs. This allowed many players to have the sense of achievement of being able to complete the raid. Of course, word got around, and so many more players than normal have now joined this raid tier, which we see as a positive development. But of course, there are also many players who would have liked a more exciting race for the first kill or a difficult raid. I have heard that they are now disappointed, and at the moment I'm developing the raid for 7.2, which will again have a more unique and difficult elements for these players. In addition, there's also the ultimate raid, which will be released in 7.1. This one will be difficult again, so prepare well for it. So, he's saying that the buffs definitely played a role in the balance. I would like to raise a counterpoint. And for that, I am going to actually need, at the very least on my side monitor here, the actual adjustments that were made in that patch. Because I can tell you right now, the experience that he's describing doesn't match with what actually happened. So, for example, Paladin and Dark Knight got damage buffs. Okay. I don't think my group ran either. I'm pretty sure we ran Gunbreaker Warrior if I'm looking back. So ignore all of those job changes other than, I guess, trajectory. Monk, Dragoon, Ninja, Samurai, and Reaper all got some adjustments. Reaper was already strong and Viper was obviously already strong. This is really where the majority of it comes because most people run double Fizz range. Now, our group ran double Caster, I believe, until the 4th fight. So we didn't benefit from all of these. We benefited just from the Viper buffs, which were pretty big. On top of it being easier to play, it also just was a general buff to their damage as well. But I think we were Viper Reaper, which were the two strongest. Reaper didn't increase in power that much. It did, but not that much comparatively to like Viper, which saw a pretty noticeable increase. Then we had Machinist getting a buff. I didn't play Machinist. Dancer got like a little buff. I didn't play either. Black Mage, we had a Pictomancer, which was already strong, like he said. And then Summoner, Red Mage, White Mage got a small potency buff, and then Astro got, its quality of life that it got. Plus 7.01 did have some changes as well. I can tell you right now that beating the 4th boss with basically a full 60 seconds to spare had nothing to do with any of these job changes. Most of my raid team didn't have any benefits from this. The melee role is the only major role where our group would have seen any benefits, which means that's Picto, which is what it was already balanced around by their own words. Pictomancer 7.0 values were part of the balance. It means we barely were buffed as an entire team, 2 of our jobs essentially. And we beat it with a minute to spare. I'll say that the fight was undertuned way before the job changes actually happened. And I think a big factor in that is the second phase being an almost entire uptime phase because it's a wall boss and it doesn't really force you to the back of the room for very many things. Now, mind you, that's without uptime sunrise and that's with deaths and damage downs. Remember that 2 or 3 deaths he said that they were okay with? I'm pretty sure we had 2 deaths and 2 damage downs, maybe even more. I think we actually had even more than that. And we beat it with a minute to spare. So I think that this statement's closer to being correct on the first 3 fights, which I actually think were pretty well balanced for a week 1, at least close to what was expected. I think maybe skipping the very end of M1S. M2S, like you usually have to do some of Rotten Heart in week 1, especially because of the way that fight is built. M1, you can skip the little dashes at the end, but that's whatever. Pretty important because a lot of people didn't even know how to do them, still don't know how to do them. And then M3, we saw pretty close to the end too. It's just that there's a lot of downtime there. So I feel like they got a lot closer with those, and you can kind of see how the balance changes made those like a little bit less stressful. No, the 4th fight was way undertuned no matter what they say. It's not just based on the job changes. It definitely factored in. Even if they made none of these changes, you still would have killed it with like 45 seconds to spare and like a perfect run. So I'm not going to be in complete agreement. Generally, when it comes to raid balance stuff, I tend to disagree with Yoshi-P a lot. I mean, you got to remember, I live in a world where I've had to witness him call Midas between second and final coil difficulty. I've lived that life. So I have no shame in disagreeing with producer and director Yoshi-P when it comes to the way certain things are balanced and handled in the raid. I fundamentally don't agree with it on some points. So, yeah, I think this was, I think the fourth fight was undertuned regardless of what they say. Obviously, I think I agree that, you know, if they say they didn't rebalance it, they obviously didn't rebalance it. It's a factor. Is it the main factor? No, it was always going to be undertuned. Listen, the PF finds a way to get to the final sword quiver plenty of time. So if anything, they nailed it. And then I think there's one final question here about data center traveling from more Aetherites than just the city states. And they just said that at first they were only going to do it from one place. They eventually made it 3 starting city states, but that they technically could, but they just want it to happen as quickly as possible. And it's easier if it's narrowed down to just a few locations. So that's the last one. And I think we've been told that before anyway. All the same, glad to got this interview out. Glad to have that discussion about the raid itself. Again, I'm sure plenty of people, there will be people who use that statement as proof that that's why it was easy, or that that thought was why it was too easy. Then there are people who will have done it and understand how the numbers work and understand that it had nothing to do with all that, because most of our jobs were 7.0 or 7.01 balance based, and that does not make for a 1 minute gap between enrage and clear, which is only going to widen with more gear, etc., etc. Anyway, that is going to be a wrap for this video on this interview. Again, from crystaluniverse.de. And again, in the YouTube video, I will include a link in the description. I can also share it in the Twitch chat after I'm actually done here. But that's going to be a wrap. So thanks, everyone, for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned. We should be moving into info season soon with 14 regarding 7.1. September has TGS, and I'd be willing to bet we see a live letter there. And that would be the development roadmap and potentially the 7.1 Part 1 live letter, which would honestly just make sense. So looking forward to it. All the same, I'll see you in the next video. And until then, take care.